I'm taking a bite out of one of Falcom's most beloved JRPG franchises, and that's Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel 1. In the meantime, I'm going to be making some tasty hamburgers by hand. This is Recipe and Review, where I pick a game to review and try to cobble together a nice tasty recipe influenced or pulled directly from the game itself. This season I'm leaning heavily into the JRPGs as I have a known soft spot for the genre. So grab your aprons, lean back, and enjoy whatever concoction we come up with. Let's start off with some of our favorite ingredients. We're gonna need, first and foremost, ground beef. We need meat to make our patties. I went 94% lean this time, but if you want to go more lean or less lean, that is completely up to your own volition. Next, we need onion. You'll find out what that's for later. 1 teaspoon of smokehouse maple, 1 teaspoon of jalapeno garlic powder, 1 teaspoon of black pepper, 1 teaspoon of dill weed, and you guessed it, 1 teaspoon of salt. Don't forget the buns, because that's one of the most important parts for a burger. Lots of familiar ingredients here, just like our first entry into the Trails of Cold Steel saga. It's a new take on a classic JRPG style, turn-based combat and a side of social sim. If you're new to JRPGs or Trails in general, this is a solid entry point. It's not breaking ground, but it doesn't need to. It's classic comfort food to fill the cravings with good flavor and plenty of meat to bite into. The premise of this recipe is pretty simple. We're going to take the ingredients from this plate and mix them in this pan, and then we're going to cook them in this pan. The premise of this game, however, a little bit more complicated. You play as Reen, the son of a minor noble. Reen joins the military academy called Thor's and is placed into Class 7, a ragtag group of nobles and commoners forced to work together. I like that. I like that a lot. It has a lot of room for different perspectives. It has a lot of room for character conflict and story conflict that leads to some very interesting moments down the line. Kind of like mixing all of these ingredients into this plot. There is an aspect of this game I didn't like, however. There's a large emphasis on the political goings-ons within this universe. And if you haven't played the numerous other games within this realm, it can be a bit confusing, like adding a little bit of salt to this beef. But trust me, it's important. That being said, it didn't stop me from liking this game, however. There was enough in-between dialogue and enough character development for me to really grasp onto the general idea of what was happening. It just took me a while to, warm up to it. Kind of like how I have to warm up this pan on the stove. I'm going to go ahead and add a bit of oil to this pan to get it nice and warmed up. Not too much though, just enough to keep things from sticking. Then we'll set it to medium heat. Once our pan is nice and warm, we're going to go ahead and ball these up into nice little patty shapes. And I usually go about 1/4 pound per patty, so I can get 4 out of them out of a pound. And once we have the general shape of our patties, we're gonna go ahead and slap these bad boys down. Given the size of these patties, they might just take a little bit to warm up to the right temperature, just like the characters in Trails of Cold Steel want. So let's go ahead and talk about that. Class 7 is full of personality, and it's mostly a good thing. Reen, our protagonist, is a pretty well-written character with some balanced archetypes and yet a vague enough backstory to keep players interested. I enjoyed a majority of the cast, though there were a few duds. Macias, for instance, was a bit of a non-starter with little depth. A thing that does change in future games, but that's spoilers for future videos. Dias is another instance. Cool concept, but forgettable character. On the other hand, there were some real standouts, especially once their characters interacted with their family members and their hometowns. Now, we want to make sure that those patties are cooked nice and evenly, not too overdone, not too underdone, kind of like some of the relationships and the plot threads of this game. A good burger is a juicy burger, and a lot of the juice from JRPGs comes from the combat. So how does the combat stack up in Trails of Cold Steel 1? Let's find out. Combat in this game is tried and true staple of the genre, good old turn-based. It does add a unique flair of having to adjust character positioning to avoid enemy attacks and get better range. Combined with the addition of link attacks and orbaments, the combat overall was pretty enjoyable. Some of the menus and tutorials were a bit hard to follow at first, but they fell into place pretty quick. Difficulty-wise, it's forgiving but adjustable. Whether you want to have a laid-back experience or an edge-of-your-seat challenge, the game gives you the ability to adjust without punishment. In the school life dungeon rhythm, a little Persona-like, structured and maybe a bit repetitive to some, but I found it enjoyable and reliable. So patties are done, and we go ahead and set those aside. And remember I told you you'd find out what the onion was for later? Now is later. We're gonna go ahead and start cutting these up, and we have a secret little sauce that's gonna go on the top of these burgers. Now, if the pacing feels a little bit off to you about this video, I could say the same thing about Trails of Cold Steel 3. Trails of Cold Steel 1. Using the same pan we just cooked our patties in, we're gonna go ahead and scrape our onions into this pot, this pan. And we're gonna go ahead and cook them until they're clear and they've absorbed all of the juices from our patties. And while these cook, I'm gonna go ahead and tell you why I thought the pacing was a little bit odd. As a standard, Trails of Cold Steel hums along with its pacing at a steady rhythm. Each chapter drops you into new regions with fresh side quests and story developments. About the last third of the game, however, without spoilers, it's tonal whiplash. Maybe longtime fans of the franchise know what's coming, but it threw me for a bit of a loop. It was jarring, but not enough to ruin the experience, and it was about as over the top as you'd expect the genre. And just like that, our toppings are done. So let's go ahead and put our burger together and get a final verdict. And just like putting a burger together, the audio and visuals of a game kind of squeeze the whole game together and complete it. So how do they stack up in this game? The music is functional but not memorable, a bit like the anime equivalent of stock music. It wasn't bad, but I'd be hard-pressed to remember a single tune from this game. Visually, I'd have to say about the same, but at least it's part of the charm. It leans heavily into the anime aesthetics while keeping design simple but consistent. Alright, now that out of the way, let's get to the final verdict. How does this burger taste? And how does this game rate? For newcomers, this game mostly works, unless you're trying to get into the deep end of the Erebonian politics, and then good luck. For veterans, it's a classic. It's nothing too wild, but it is comforting. There are a few slow-cooked ingredients like characters and plot devices that took a while to heat up, but a lot of those plot threads do pay off in later games if you decide to move on. That being said, the things that did cook really cooked well. So to sum it all up, there was some good flavor to this, but a couple items that were just a little bit underdone. The pacing felt strange, and some of the audiovisual stuff just felt a little bit too generic. But still, if you're a fan of that old school JRPG feel, or just something comfy with a bit of flair, then Trails of Cold Steel 1 is a perfect fit. I'm giving this game a 7.5 out of 10. That's it for this video. If you liked this recipe, or if you liked this game, or if you had differing opinions, go ahead and comment. If you want more recipes and reviews, please hit the subscribe button and like as well to tell the algorithm that you want more. And we will see you in the next one.